Hi, Senator May Quade. Thank you for being with me today. Could you please introduce yourself, telling us what is your area of expertise, your title? If you have a specific way we'd like us to call you, please let us know.
Yeah. Hi, good morning. I'm Senator Erin Maye Quade. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the state senator in Minnesota from Senate District 56, which is Apple Valley, Rosemount, and Eagan. And my special interest areas are children and families, reproductive rights, health and justice, veterans issues, ending hunger, disability justice, and climate.
Wonderful. We understand that you've been interested and you have participated in events to talk about Anna Arnold Hedgeman. But could you provide some background on who she was, as you understand that she was such an important figure in the civil rights movement, and sometimes she's not that remembered. But could you tell us
Yeah.
in a nutshell who she was?
Yeah, so Anna Arnold Hedgeman was a Minnesotan. We're really excited about that. And she was a woman who grew up in a small town here in Minnesota. And she was, I believe, the first Black person or first Black graduate from Hamline University here in Minnesota. She was a she was hugely involved in the civil rights movement. And she taught as a teacher in the South, and then she moved to Harlem, where she was part of the mayor's cabinet there. And she was the first, I believe, Black woman hired as in that position. And she was the only woman who was part of the I always forget what it was called, like the round table that helped organize the March on Washington, which is the famous march where Martin Luther King gave his I Have a Dream speech. And one of my favorite anecdotes about Anna Arnold Hedgeman is that she was always a little irritated with Dr. King because she thought that the speech should have said, "We have a dream." And I think that is just so it's a perfect encapsulation of who she was. She was a fighter, an activist, an educator, a public servant, and really always thinking about how can she do the most good for the most people. And it definitely rings true about her. "We have a dream" would have been a much better refrain for that speech.
What were her specific contributions for the that famous 1963 March on Washington, and how have they been erased or not recognized over the years?
Yeah, I mean, she was Anna Arnold Hedgeman. She was a woman of faith, and I think it was her idea to bring in faith communities to, even though Dr. King himself was, of course, a part of faith community, but I think it was really her idea to kind of merge these two together for the March on Washington. And I think it was also, she was a founding member of the National Organization of Women now. And so I think her perspective certainly brought in the perspective of women and children and families because of her work with the Child Study Association and her work as a teacher. And so she recruited literally like 40,000 people, 50,000 people, something like that, to come to the March on Washington. When you ask me about why do you think that she's been erased, the only thing I can come up with is it is just true that even in our best moments, we let the patriarchy get in the way. And it doesn't surprise me that the role of this woman has gone unnoticed and unrecognized for so long. But she was absolutely crucial. Like, she individually recruited tens of thousands of people to come to the March on Washington, and really helped convince people, particularly Protestants, that racism was a stain to their faith, right? And helped explain to white Christians why racism was bad for their religion and bad for them. And so she was crucial to getting that message out there and to that really important moment in the civil rights movement.
Over the course of our research, we've been discovering the fascinating work of women like Dorothy Height, Tacy Bates. But who are some of those other women from the movement whose voices have been muted or erased, either not only for the March on Washington, but the civil rights movement in general? And if you can tell us a bit of those women that pop in your head or that have inspired you
Yeah.
specifically over your career.
I always think about Claudette Colvin, who preceded Rosa Parks. She was the first person who actually refused to give her up her seat. And, I think it is very true that we like to make sure that the faces of our movements or the moments of our movements are the right ones, quote unquote. And then sometimes you don't get to pick. And so Claudette Colvin, she was the one who really stood up and and said like, no, I will not give up my seat. But she wasn't the perfect person to do it. And so Rosa Parks was chosen later on. And I always just think about how important it is that our heroes can look a lot of different ways and they can be a lot of different ways. And I think about Claudette Colvin a lot. She was not as light skinned as Rosa Parks. She wasn't as docile, maybe. As she didn't have good hair, right? Those are some of the reasons that were given as why she wasn't like the best face of this moment. And I think about that a lot, just like even the white supremacy and the racism that's like factored into those decisions. And so Claudette Colvin is a person that comes to my mind when we think about people who might have been erased from important movements.
Why have men like those who are a part of the Big Six dominated so many of our conversations and historical accounts of the movement?
Wait, will you repeat that?
Why have men like those who are a part of the Big Six have dominated so many of our conversations and historical accounts of the civil rights movement?
Well, I think it's manyfold. I think in part it's because even in the movements for our liberation, we tend to center men, cisgender men. And even though oftentimes it is queer women, it is Black women, trans women who are really leading the efforts, right? Black trans women were the first ones who threw bricks at Stonewall. And so if you look throughout our movements, throughout time immemorial, you will find that movements are often being held up and pushed forward by women in those movements. But it is often behind the men who are the spokesperson, the voices, the enigma, right? We really love as history readers to read about the complicated men that are, part of this instead of the movement of women that have really been put together. And so I think it's easier sometimes when there's a face and one spokesperson, and women tend not to lead like that. We tend to lead in packs. We tend to lead in movements that are, wide and deep. And so it is harder to profile a movement that is full of people than it is to profile one person. And so I think it's just our own sexism that gets in the way. And hopefully the work that you all are doing and these conversations help to kind of reintegrate the really important people who are part of these movements into the history.
Yeah, and that's the big mission of our team, especially during Women's History Month, just to tell the stories. And we have understood that given the sort of the political shift that we've been going through over the past few years in the US, it has become so important to tell the stories. Do you agree with that? Do you think it's important nowadays to bring those faces up and bring light to the stories that and those people who have played such an important role in such crucial moments in our history?
It absolutely is. And particularly for people who are in movement work, there are a lot of times it can feel like you've arrived at a place where you need a movement to solve a problem. And it feels like you're creating something for the very first time, when in reality, we have had decades and decades and, millennia of movements that have made change. And we can look to them to how to model successful movements. And so the more that we tell those full stories, the more that we have those models to look at and to replicate and not have to start all over. And we can look and say what we might want to do differently as well. But I work in the reproductive rights, health, and justice space, and the reproductive rights movement has typically been dominated by white women, and the reproductive justice movement is a great inclusive full picture look at how do we achieve reproductive autonomy and freedom in the United States and across the country and the world, excuse me. So these are ways that we can make sure that our movements are more effective, they're more inclusive, and that we're able to build each other up and achieve liberation.
Yeah, and we understand that the importance and the relevance to just know your references. Like I know it's been such a repeated phrase, but it's so true.
Yes.
Before I proceed to my last question, I just wanted to ask you about your work. Like how it's been for you to be a senator in your state, and what have been the biggest challenges, not only in being a leading voice in the causes that you are defending, but just as being a woman in that position. Like what has it been for you to hold that office, basically?
Yeah, I mean, I have the distinct privilege of being one of the three first Black women ever elected to the Minnesota State Senate in our state's history. And so I'm also a new mom, and I come into the work with, I'm the first Black mom ever elected to the state Senate in Minnesota history. And so bringing that perspective and that experience has been really, really important to help us make better policy. It means our voices are at the table. It also means that the Senate has to change a little bit. When I started, I was still breastfeeding, and you weren't allowed to drink water on the Senate floor. And that is obviously a rule that was put in place by people who were not breastfeeding and maybe were not affected by needing to drink a lot of water in order to maintain milk supply, right? And so there are sometimes, it's very clear that this place wasn't made for people like me, but we are remaking it for people like me. And that's work. It's joyful work. It's hard work, but it is work that's worth doing.
Wonderful, and thank you so much. Is there anything that I didn't ask you that you think it's important for our audiences to know or to understand? Like, or what we have the privilege to share our content with a wide variety of populations across the U.S. Is there anything that I didn't ask you, not only when it comes to the civil rights movement and its voices, but also about anything you think it's important for them to know that I didn't ask you? That please, do you have the floor to share anything you'd like to share with us?
Oh gosh, I don't think that there's anything. I mean, I'm sure there's always something, but I think Anna Arnold Hedgeman is she's someone that I think about often. I have her book at home, and when I started reading it, I was like, oh, I'll just dog ear some pages if it resonates with me. And every page is dog eared. There's this one quote in particular, and I'm gonna not get it totally right, but essentially she talks about the frustration she has of how much time she's had to spend basically working for her own liberation. Like, what could she have done with her life if she was allowed to be free already? And that just resonated with me so much. Like, what could I have contributed to the world if I wasn't having to fight to be free first? And that is something I think about a lot. And the fact that she wasn't just like, oh well, that she was actually frustrated by this, that it pissed her off. I loved that, because I think that's where she got a lot of her fire from, is she was really out there trying to help children and families and trying to, she ran for Congress and do good policy work. But then at the same time, she was having to do the March on Washington, and she was having to work with the NAACP and start the National Organization of Women, because she couldn't do all those things while these systems of oppression remained in place. And so I appreciated that message from her, and I carry that with me.
Well, thank you so much. We'll stay in touch with your office once the story comes out. It should be
Great.
very soon this week. And we appreciate the time. It was really nice to meet you.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to meet you.